There comes a moment in history when silence is betrayal and fear is collaboration. That moment is now. The world has clapped for Africa's poverty, laughed at its dependency, and profited from its division, but one man refused to bow, one voice refused to beg, one fire refused to be extinguished. His name is Ibrahim Traoré, and the world was not ready. They were not ready for a soldier who speaks like a scholar and leads like a storm. They were not ready for a man who dares to say, "We are not your playground. We are not your mine, we are not your charity case, we are sovereign." He did not ask for favors, he declared freedom, he did not read from colonial scripts. He tore them apart in the eyes of those who wrote them. Today, I speak not to decorate your emotions with poetry, I speak to disrupt your comfort with truth, because the chains you see on Africa are not forged from iron. They are forged from debt, from dependency, from distraction. They are forged from the lie that we must ask permission to be free, but a new fire has risen, led by a generation that refuses to be used, refuses to be fooled, and refuses to wait. That fire is led by men like Ibrahim Traoré. They feared him not because he carried a weapon, but because he carried the one thing more dangerous than any bullet, the truth. When Ibrahim Traoré spoke, he did not whisper, he roared. His voice did not float for applause, it struck like thunder through the silence of broken nations. He did not come to make the powerful comfortable. He came to remind the powerless that their chains were not made of steel, but of silence, fear, and mental colonization. And the moment he opened his mouth, the world realized something terrifying. That truth, once spoken with courage, does not echo, it explodes. They dressed up deception in diplomacy. They wrapped oppression in policy. They baptized theft with terms like aid, development, and partnership. But he tore the mask off their language. He said what others feared to say, that Africa is not poor, it is being looted. That Africa is not broken, it is being broken. That sovereignty is not something given, it is something taken, seized, demanded without apology. And for saying what generations only whispered behind closed doors, he was marked as dangerous, not because he lied, but because he told the truth too clearly. When a man stands up and names the chains, those who built them tremble. When a young soldier refuses to bow, those who profit from obedience panic. And make no mistake, they never feared our weakness, they feared our awakening. The colonizer has never feared a sleeping Africa. The imperialist has never feared a divided people. But when one man speaks with clarity, when one man says no more, when one man turns his voice into a hammer, the chains begin to crack. They were not ready for a leader who would rather walk with the people than dine with the global elite. They were not ready for someone who exposed how foreign aid is often nothing but a leash. They were not ready for someone who turned his back on exploitation and faced his own people with dignity. And in that moment the world remembered what it tried to forget, that the African spirit is not dead. It is simply waiting for men who are not afraid of being unpopular in Paris, so long as they are honored in Ouagadougou. His truth was not a speech, it was an exodus. It was a breaking away from a system that had convinced us that freedom comes with funding. That dignity is handed down through trade agreements, that justice is negotiated behind closed doors while the people starve in silence. He reminded the youth that if you must beg for it, it is not real. If it comes with a signature from your oppressor, it is not sovereignty. If it demands your silence in exchange for support, it is not partnership, it is control. When truth is spoken boldly, it does not need permission. It does not ask, "May I speak?" It demands to be heard, and that is what Ibrahim Traoré did. He broke the silence, and in doing so, he broke the spell, because silence is not peace. Silence is not diplomacy. Silence is not wisdom. In a continent crying out for justice, silence is betrayal. and he refused to be a traitor to his own people. He stood and said what others were too strategic to say, too diplomatic to say, too compromised to say. That is why they called him dangerous. That is why they tried to smear him, because he reminded us that truth does not serve systems, it shatters them. When truth enters a room, every lie must justify its existence. When truth walks into power, every puppet begins to panic, because truth makes cowards visible. It makes sellouts sweat. It makes the colonizer look in the mirror and see his real face, and that is why they were not ready. Because for too long they built systems assuming that the African would always bow, that the African would always trade his voice for validation, but Ibrahim Traoré stood and proved them wrong, not with violence, but with clarity. You see, clarity is dangerous. A man with clarity cannot be bought. A man with clarity cannot be tricked. A man with clarity cannot be ruled by confusion. And when that clarity becomes collective, when a nation sees what it could not see before, that is when chains break. That is when people rise. That is when the ground shakes beneath the feet of the colonizer. The world was not ready for that. They were ready for another puppet, not a patriot. They were ready for another signature, not resistance. But he came not to play their game. He came to remind us that truth once spoken is the first step to freedom, and freedom once demanded can no longer be delayed. So let the world fear the truth, because that fear is the beginning of their end. They have taught us that freedom is something to be requested politely, something to be earned through obedience, something granted by those who hold the reins of global power. They said liberation is a process negotiated across tables dressed in diplomacy and compromise. But Ibrahim Traoré came not to beg, not to bargain, not to ask. He came to reclaim, because freedom is not given by those who benefit from your chains. Freedom is not offered by those who colonized your dignity. Freedom is seized by those who are willing to pay the price in resistance, in clarity, in unapologetic courage. The lie of modern imperialism is that you can be free while being dependent. That you can own your land while signing it away in contracts. That you can be sovereign while borrowing from your oppressors. And when a man like Traoré stands and says no more, the mask of partnership crumbles. Because what they fear most is not a nation with tanks. It is a nation with self-respect. It is a people who say, we will starve with honor before we eat with slavery. And when Burkina Faso said that through the leadership of its son, the world could no longer pretend it was in control. He did not wait for approval. He did not ask for permission. He did not knock on the door of international validation. He broke that door because those doors were not built to let us in. They were built to keep us begging. He understood something that many have forgotten, that you cannot reform a system built to exploit you. You do not negotiate with a machine designed to extract your soul. You dismantle it. You disconnect from it. You reject its terms even if it costs you comfort, because the price of comfort is often the death of dignity. You cannot be half free. You cannot be independent in language and colonized in economy. You cannot sing about heroes while selling the land they died for. Ibrahim Traoré said what every truly free man must eventually say, that the cost of real sovereignty is struggle, that if you do not fight for your people, you are fighting against them. That if you speak of revolution and still depend on aid, your speech is decoration. And so he chose a different path, the hard path, the lonely path. The path where leaders are not invited to cocktail summits, but are embraced by barefoot villagers because they know he fights for them, not for headlines. And yes, the world was shaken, not because he attacked it, but because he exposed it. He exposed the fraud of democracy sold in exchange for silence. He exposed the debt traps masked as development. He exposed the schemes written in English and French but signed in blood. And that is why they feared him. Not because he declared war with weapons, but because he declared war with integrity, and when integrity becomes the weapon of a nation, empires begin to tremble. This was not about Burkina Faso alone. This was a message to every African child, every forgotten village, every unemployed youth wondering why riches surround them but poverty chokes them. He showed us that the chains are still here. They've just changed color. The whip is no longer on our backs, it's in our policies. The invader no longer marches with boots. He arrives with loans, contracts, and smiling threats. And to defeat such an enemy, you must be willing to stand alone, to speak when your voice shakes, to lead even when the lights are off and the money is gone. Traoré reminded us that no nation is truly free if its future depends on the mercy of foreign hands. That sovereignty is not about singing anthems. It's about owning your destiny. It's about controlling your food, your gold, your land, your borders. It's about saying to the world, we will build with our own hands. We will defend with our own spirit. We will rise even if no one claps for us. That is freedom, and that is the freedom he chose. They said he would fall. They said he would break. They said the pressure would force him to kneel. But how do you break a man who has already buried his fear? How do you silence a voice that does not echo in foreign halls, but in the hearts of his people? He is not a puppet. He is not a diplomat. He is not a placeholder. He is a reminder that true freedom will always be loud, inconvenient, costly, and absolutely necessary. They told the youth to wait, to grow old first, to gain permission first, to be approved by systems that were never built for them. They told the youth, you are the future, as if the present was not burning. But Ibrahim Traoré stood up, not as an old man filled with regret, but as a young man filled with fire. He did not wait to be accepted. He did not wait to be applauded. He acted because he understood the truth they fear you discovering, that youth is not a rehearsal, youth is not a delay, youth is the engine of every revolution that ever mattered. The lie of the modern world is that youth must remain passive, distracted, and entertained. The system will hand you screens instead of substance, likes instead of legacy, pleasure instead of purpose. They know if they can keep you busy chasing comfort, you will never rise in your calling. If they can keep you scrolling, you won't start building. But when Traoré rose, he broke that pattern. He reminded us that a young voice, when anchored in truth, can drown out 1,000 speeches from old cowards, that a young heart, when rooted in justice, can revive a dying nation. He did not come through the gates of privilege. He came through the ranks of struggle. He did not inherit influence. He earned it through clarity, through sacrifice, through unshakable conviction, and that is what makes the world uncomfortable, because when the youth stop waiting and start leading, the world must either change or collapse. And those who built their power on youth apathy fear the day that young people wake up not to complain, but to create, not to echo, but to lead, not to fit in, but to transform. You see, age does not define wisdom. Vision does. Gray hair does not make a leader. Purpose does. There are old men sitting in palaces with no courage, and young men walking through villages carrying entire nations in their hearts. And Traoré proved that leadership is not about years, it is about urgency. It is about knowing that delay is betrayal, that waiting is complicity, that the longer we sit, the deeper we sink. He stood not because he was ready, but because the moment was ready for someone like him. And he answered the call that so many feared to even acknowledge. The youth are not lacking strength. They are lacking direction. They are not weak. They are just waiting for a voice to call them to battle. But that voice cannot come from the same mouths that sold their future. It cannot come from those who trade sovereignty for security. It must come from among them, from the ones who feel the fire burning in their bones. From the ones who are tired of dancing while their nations drown, from the ones who know that their value is not in how many languages they speak, but in how much truth they carry, he looked across the continent and saw that the wealth of Africa is not just its gold, its oil, or its diamonds. The wealth of Africa is its youth, its thinkers, its dreamers, its doers, and he said with action what so many only say with slogans, that we do not need to wait to be led. We are the leaders, we do not need to watch. We must wage a different kind of war. A war of minds, a war of values, a war of courage, and he did not just inspire the youth. He called them out of hiding. He said, "You are not too young to be wise. You are not too early to be powerful. You are not the future. You are the fire now. And that fire, once lit, cannot be extinguished." It spreads in the classrooms, in the markets, in the slums, in the cities. It spreads in the hearts of young women who refuse to be silent. It spreads in the fists of young men who refuse to be used. It spreads when the youth stop asking who will save us and begin saying we will save each other. That is what they fear: organized youth, awakened youth, fearless youth, because youth with clarity becomes revolution. Youth with strategy becomes change. Youth with conviction becomes the storm that sweeps away every corrupt empire. Ibrahim Traoré stood, and by standing he reminded millions that the time is now, not tomorrow. Not after another summit, not after another lecture, now, because history is not written by those who waited. It is written by those who moved when the moment came, and the moment is here. The youth must not just rise. They must take the wheel, take the tools, take the truth, and build a new era. The fire is already burning. The only question is, will you feed it or will you fear it? There is a dangerous illusion that has been fed to our people for generations. The belief that liberation can be negotiated, that justice can be asked for politely, that the system which thrives on your silence will somehow listen to your pain. But history has shown us something very clear. You do not negotiate with chains, you break them. You do not reform a structure that was designed to keep you weak, you dismantle it. You do not plead with an empire built on your exploitation. You reject its power, expose its lies, and rebuild from your own soil, your own strength, your own truth. This is what Ibrahim Traoré understood, and that is why they fear him. They fear him because he did not play their game. He did not wear the mask of diplomacy to beg for a seat at a poison table. He turned over the table because you cannot dine with those who eat your children. You cannot sign deals with those who enslaved your fathers. You cannot shake hands with the same hands that have been draining your land, your future, and your dignity. Traoré did not speak to be accepted by the world. He spoke to wake up his people, and in doing so, he reminded us all that silence is not peace. It is surrender. For too long we have been told to be reasonable, to be patient, to wait for the system to change, but let us not lie to ourselves. The system was never designed to uplift Africa. It was designed to control it. From the borders drawn with rulers to the currencies printed outside the continent, everything was structured to keep us dependent. They do not fear your progress. They control it. They do not support your development. They script it. And when a man dares to step out of that script, when a leader refuses to be a pawn in their narrative, they panic, because they know that one spark of defiance can light 1,000 fires. He showed us that you cannot fix corruption with conversation. You cannot eliminate exploitation with edits. You cannot correct colonialism with compromise. You must reject it, root and branch, and that rejection begins in the mind. It begins when a people say, we no longer recognize your authority, we no longer accept your labels, we no longer obey your false definitions of success. Because when the mind is free, the chains on the land begin to crack. When the mind is clear, the policies of oppression begin to fail. And when a nation stands on truth, No force on earth can bury it. You do not bargain with thieves who wear suits and call themselves donors. You do not negotiate with those who demand your resources and offer you advice. That is not partnership. That is manipulation. Traoré refused to smile at those who have robbed Africa for centuries. He looked them in the eye and told them what others whispered behind closed doors: we are not your subjects, we are not your clients, we are not your tools, we are sovereign. And those words, spoken without fear, became a weapon. Because when truth is spoken boldly, it destroys every lie that held a people hostage. We must learn from his example. We must understand that we cannot change the world by playing by its rules. The rules were written to make you lose. The systems were built to drain you dry and leave you grateful for the drops. Real change does not come from inside the system. It comes from rejecting the system and building your own. And building your own means creating education that teaches truth, not colonial memory. It means developing economies that prioritize people, not foreign profit. It means standing for values that cannot be bought by aid or silenced by threats. When a man like Traoré speaks, he does not speak for applause. He speaks to remind us that we do not owe the world our silence. We owe our ancestors our courage. We owe our children our boldness. We owe our nations our resistance. We owe ourselves the right to decide what kind of world we will build, even if it means rejecting the world they try to impose on us. He refused to ask for justice from those who profit from injustice. He refused to bow to systems that require silence to survive. He refused to trade truth for temporary peace. And in doing so, he called all of us to a higher standard, not to negotiate with our oppressors, but to liberate ourselves from them. The world will not be changed by those who ask politely. It will be changed by those who rise, those who resist, and those who refuse to kneel.